Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. Hope you had a good weekend. We're going to start a brand new unit in math today. We're going to start a unit that focuses on square numbers and square roots. Now the focus of today's lesson is going to just be to figure out what exactly a square number is. So what I want to do is start off, this is something I would have had you do in class, and I'd actually would have had you use little squares to do this, but I'm going to actually just draw a few with you to show you what I'm getting at. Now this activity says using this small square, build as many larger squares as you can. So what I'd like you to imagine is this small square right here. Let's call this small square. We'll call it, it's a square that has an area of 1 because it takes one little square to make it, and its side lengths are both 1. And so we would call this a 1 by 1 square. Okay, the next size square I could make using those little squares would be if I did something like this. So if I used those little squares, and I'm going to have to draw this, normally I'd make it so it's not going to be perfect, but I could use 4 of those squares to make another square. And the area of that square, since there's 4 of those mini squares in there, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, the area of that square would be 4, and we would say that is a 2 by 2 square because it has 2 lengths, 2 squares along each side, right? 2 there, 2 there, 2 there. So it's a 2 by 2 square. The next square I could make using those mini squares would be something a little larger. And again, normally I would have had you build it, but this time I'm just going to draw it the best I can, so it's not going to be perfect. And we would have had something like this and something like this. Again, this isn't perfect, right? But you have to imagine these guys here are all those little mini squares I started out with. This time, we have a square that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, an area of 9, and we would call it a 3 by 3 square because it has 3 squares down each side, right? And the last one we'll do, you can imagine if I took those little small squares and made something bigger. Did something like this. Doink, 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 and doink, doink, doink. And we would have, say this square has an area of 16, because there are 16 of those little mini squares that make up the big square. And we would also say that this is a 4 by 4 square because it has four squares going down each side. So the whole point of this is when we're talking about square numbers, we're talking about numbers that make a perfect square. So in this activity, the numbers that are square numbers, 1 is a square number because one little mini square makes up a perfect square. 4 is a square number because 4 of those mini squares make a perfect square. 9 is a square number, and 16 is a square number because those numbers literally make perfect squares. That's basically what a perfect square is, or what a square number is. It makes they're a number that really forms a square. So, a perfect square has side lengths that are exactly the same and not rounded off or estimated. So all of these, number 1, 4, 9, 16, are all perfect squares because they have side lengths that are exactly the same and they're not rounded off or estimated. So the focus of this today is just going to be looking at these perfect squares. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to flip over to this chart. And I'm just going to look at some perfect squares and some terminology about perfect squares. So I'm going to start with the ones we already did. We started off with a square that was a 1 by 1. And if you remember earlier in the year when we looked at exponents when we studied integers, we're also going to write this in exponential form. Now when we're saying 1 times 1, we can say 1 with a little 2 on top, like that in the right hand corner. And we would say that that 1 times 1 means 1 to the power of 2, or we can also say 1 squared. And the reason we say 1 squared is because 1 squared literally forms a square. The area of that square that 1 by 1 makes is 1. The next one we talked about was a 2 by 2, which is 2 to the power of 2, or 2 squared, and that square was 4. The reason we say 2 squared is because 2 squared literally forms a square that has an area of 4, and we saw that in this activity right here, right? 2 squared forms a square that has an exact area of 4. So what I'm just going to do now is fill in this chart, and you can probably guess what's coming next, right? 3 by 3, 3 to the power of 2, or 3 squared, which is 9. 4 by 4, 4 to the power of 2, or 4 squared, which is 16. 5 by 5, 5 to the power of 2, 25. 6 by 6, 6 to the power of 2, or 6 squared, 36. 7 by 7, 7 to the power of 2, or 7 squared, which is 49. 8 by 8, 8 squared, or 8 to the power of 2, which is 64. 9 by 9, 9 squared, and or 9 to the power of 2, which is 81. 10 by 10, 10 to the power of 2, which is 100. I'm going to wrap up this video by doing up to 20 by 20. So keeping going. And I didn't practice beforehand, so hopefully I remember these, else I'm going to look bad on the video here. 11 by 11, which is 11 squared, which is 121. Yes! 12 by 12, 12 to the power of 2, 144. 13 by 13, 13 squared, 169. I'm getting nervous because I really haven't practiced these in a while. 14 by 14, 14 to the power of 2. That's going to be 196. 15 by 15, 15 squared, 225. Having more confidence now. 16 by 16, that's 16 squared, that's 256. 17 by 17, that's 17 squared, that's 289. 18 by 18, that's 18 squared, that's 324. Whew, I think I've got it. 19 by 19, that's 19 squared, that's 361. Please be right. That's 20 by 20, which is 20 squared, which is 400. So all of these numbers right here, these guys, and these guys form perfect squares. We call those square numbers because they literally make perfect squares. That's all for the first video. In the next video I show you on square numbers, we're just going to talk a little bit about some other places where these square numbers might show up. And then that's going to basically be it for today. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.